Hello, we're picking up with the section on nihilism from Beauvoir's The Ethics of Ambiguity. Um, she had mentioned a few artistic movements and Dada and Surrealism. The reason why she selects these particular movements is because of the way they rebel against our standard understanding of meaning making in order to create the chaos and the disarray that she had pointed out. When the serious one lapses into nihilism, they lapse into that state because of the crumbling of the value that they hold seriously creates a state of disarray. And these artistic movements, from Beauvoir's perspective, particularly play on that disarray. But they're also helpful for Beauvoir because they reveal the fundamental contradiction within nihilism. If you remember from Pyrrhus and Cineas, Beauvoir talks about how we get drawn back into the tangle of human commitments and projects, the fidgety child in the corner who is trying to do nothing, to be non-committal, but who ultimately starts getting kind of wrapped back up into the push and the pull of human events. The nihilist does the same. Unless they commit suicide and fully annihilate themselves, they have to make nihilism into a kind of a positive project. And so the painter who wants to destroy the meaning of painting still paints something and creates a project out of it. And so those artistic movements for Beauvoir create an interesting example of a rebellion that is wrapped up in negation that still creates something positive on the other side of it. They reject the standard understanding of the value of painting as being representational of objects, landscapes, and that kind of thing, and yet they're still painting something. They're still producing a positive project that they can outline in a meaningful way. And so nihilism has this fundamental contradiction within itself where the nihilist wants to negate everything absolutely, but that act of negation itself becomes the project to which they're committed in a way. And so nihilism is an unstable position to be in because the nihilist constantly gets pulled back into the tangle of their engagements in the world and so on. She also makes another crucial point about fascism and Nazism, in particularly, that it is a nihilistic movement, that is a fundamentally nihilistic movement that shows very clearly the relationship between nihilism and seriousness, because the serious one must negate every project that is not that which they take seriously. And so the serious person is always touched by nihilism a little bit, and seriousness and nihilism are closely related to one another. Again, because everything except the one that you have chosen must be negated, and everything becomes sacrificed to that one cause. You can see this, really clearly, especially towards the end of the war, when Hitler starts saying things like, if the German people can't fight and defend their country, then they deserve total annihilation, and that kind of thing. There you can see the pathos of nihilism at the heart of fascism. So I think that particular section is really revealing the denial of the present moment in the search for a lost past. That's a central part of fascist ideology, to reclaim the golden era and stop social degradation and all of that kind of stuff is a rejection of an annihilation of the present moment in favor of a return to the past. So I think she very clearly outlines, though briefly, she just touches on it. It's just a paragraph or so, but I think it's a very important one and is very insightful into the nature of fascist ideology as it's related to a nihilistic movement of destruction, of ultimate destruction. So those are really, I think, important passages. And now, of course, remember, these different psychological types or profiles can move and change and morph into one another. So we saw how nihilism is a disappointed seriousness, and seriousness and nihilism share certain traits and are connected to one another. Nihilism can also lead to this adventurer, this type of an adventurer. Because remember, the nihilist sees a certain truth. She says the nihilist attitude manifests a certain truth. In this attitude, one experiences the ambiguity of the human condition, but the mistake is that it defines man not as the positive existence of a lack, but as a lack at the heart of existence. Whereas the truth is that existence is not a lack as such. Remember, the lack exists so that there can be something. We exist as a lack so that we can project ourselves into our possibilities and into the future that we are not yet. So there's a positive movement of transcendence that the lack facilitates. It's not just a pure nothingness, right? No, it's a negation that enables the movement into a positive engagement with the world. That's why I said in the last video that the nihilist gets stuck and they don't make that positive gesture, and why the contradiction at the heart of nihilism will lead nihilists, if they don't kill themselves, to produce then some project out of their negation. It's unstable. It can't just rest in that way. So the nihilist recognizes their being as a lack, but they kind of misinterpret it or misunderstand it. That it throws them into a despair rather than awakening them to own up to their possibilities. Now, because of this element of truth to it, someone might recognize the lack and then decide to throw themselves into something sort of frivolously. And this is what we get there, the adventurer. So we can see the adventurer arising here. She says, the fundamental fault of the nihilist is that, challenging all given values, he does not find, beyond their ruin, the importance of that universal, absolute end which freedom itself is. It is possible that, even in his failure, a man may nevertheless keep his taste for an existence which he originally felt as a joy. Hoping for no justification, he will nevertheless take delight in living. This is basically the adventurer. He throws himself into his undertaking with zest, into exploration, conquest, war, speculation, love, politics, but he does not attach himself to the end at which he aims, only to the conquest itself. So the adventurer doesn't really care about the end so much as they just care about the movement itself, the experience of the conquest or of the adventure of the love that they are engaging in. They don't really care what the end is, or they're not wrapped up or committed to the accomplishment. They just want the process. It's adventuring for the sake of adventuring, and who cares where it ends or how it ends. The adventurer, therefore, has some of the same problems of seriousness, because the adventurer will sacrifice people and things to the quest for adventure. Think of a literal adventurer or conquest who's bringing people along with them in their exploration. If those people die or something bad happens to them, that's just part of the whole adventure. That's what part of what makes it exciting, and so on and so forth. Those people become merely pawns in the movement of this adventuring prospect. This is also in the case of something like love or sexual conquest, like Don Juan. There's a different Don Juan is the typical way we understand it, the Spanish pronunciation, but that type of person is just invested in sexual conquest. They are not engaged in a relationship with the other where they love the person and recognize them as an end in themselves, to use some of Kant's language and all of that. They just care about having the experience in which they have that sexual relationship, and then once it's over, on to the next, another notch in the belt, so to speak, which can lead to a kind of perpetual unfulfillment, right? Because again, you're not invested in the actual end or the outcome or anything like that. So it's just this empty movement where you're trying to relish and recapture the feeling of the adventure itself, and so on. Now again, there's something important that the adventurer kind of gets. They understand that values arise from their own movement and from their own activity and engagement in the world. They kind of get that, but they don't take seriously the values that they generate. They don't understand that they can justify the ends actually on their own, and so they don't commit themselves in a robust way. She says that it's obvious that this choice is very close to a genuinely moral attitude. The adventurer does not propose to be, he deliberately makes himself a lack of being. He aims expressly at existence. Though engaged in his undertaking, he is at the same time detached from the goal, and there's where it falls short of being a genuine. He doesn't, he's detached from the goal. Whether he succeeds or fails, he goes right ahead, throwing himself into a new enterprise, into which he will give himself the same, with the same indifferent ardor. So he has this sort of quasi-passion. And again, you'll see that the adventurer lapses into the passionate one. That's the next type of bad faith that Beauvoir will take up, the passionate person. She says that there are two kind of attitudes that are possible from this adventuring type. He can become conscious of the real requirement of his own freedom, which can will itself only by destining itself to an open future, by seeking to extend itself by means of the freedom of others. Therefore, in any case, the freedom of other men must be respected, and they must be helped to free themselves. So the adventurer can come to realize the important element of their freedom in relationship to other people who will help open the future to them. I mean, think about the example that I used before. The adventurer, without the group of people with whom they are adventuring, can't go on their adventure alone. They need these others. The Don Juan needs the women that he conquers in his sexual appetite. Without them, the adventure is possible. The problem is that they fail to recognize them as the freedoms that's enabling their project. And so the moral failure follows from that. Now, the adventurer can come to recognize that they need the other to open the future to them. They can become aware of that. That's going to change their attitude, though, about that's almost going to destroy the adventuring passion that they have, because they're going to be faced with the freedom of others. This is what she says later, that the man we call an adventurer is one who remains indifferent to the content, that is, to the human meaning of his action, who thinks he can assert his own existence without taking into account that of others. And so this is how the adventurer ends up sacrificing the other to the very process that they are engaged in, right? To their adventuring prospects. That is the problem. It becomes, again, tyrannical. Nothing prevents him from sacrificing these insignificant beings to his own will for power. He treats them like instruments. He will destroy them if they get in his way. Meanwhile, he appears as an enemy in the eyes of others. His undertaking is not only an individual wager, it is a combat. So the adventuring in this sense is a dangerous, because you step on people. If they get in your way, you don't take seriously their existence as a human being with their own projects and values and so on and so forth. They become mere instruments, which again is a part of the problem with these profiles. Generally speaking, these types of bad faith are prone to reduce people to objects and use them for their ends. The serious one who sacrifices people to the great cause that they've projected into an infinite absolute value outside of human existence. The adventurer who sacrifices people and uses them so that they can keep adventuring, and so on and so forth, even being disconnected from the end goal as they are detached from the object of their desire, and so on and so forth. I think that's a really important element of her analysis in this particular section. Now, if the adventurer shifts, and begins to recognize the existence of others, and becomes wrapped up in the projects of other people, he can lapse. He can turn more toward passion. The adventurer devises a sort of moral behavior because he assumes his subjectivity positively, but if he dishonestly refuses to recognize that his subjectivity necessarily transcends itself toward others, before whom he has to justify himself, which would mean taking his ends seriously and so on. If he dishonestly refuses to recognize that his subjectivity necessarily transcends itself toward others, he will enclose himself in a false independence, which will indeed be servitude. To the free man he will only be a chance ally, in whom one can have no confidence. He will easily become an enemy. In this way, the passionate man is an antithesis of the adventurer. In him, too, there is a sketch of the synthesis of freedom and its content, but in the adventurer it is the content which does not succeed in being genuinely fulfilled, whereas in the passionate man it is subjectivity which fails to fulfill itself genuinely. What characterizes the passionate man is that he sets up the object as an absolute, not, like the serious man, as a thing detached from himself, but as a thing disclosed by his subjectivity. There are transitions between the serious and passion. So the passionate one recognizes that it's them that's disclosing the object, and they become wrapped up in it as a product of their subjectivity, rather than, like the serious one, a transcendent absolute that's outside of them. It is something that has generated in them and which they give themselves over to absolutely. So again, you can see that kind of narrow-minded reduction down to a singular goal rather than the open field of possibilities. It's just this one thing. It's a kind of obsession that focus on the object of their passion, which can be another person or a hobby or some skilled craft that they take up or something like that. Again, passion is good in some sense because it recognizes the dimension of our subjectivity that is the generation of value, but by abandoning itself to that, it loses the sight of freedom, of our ability to choose, even of the fact that we have chosen the object of our passion in an important way. That way, the passionate man seeks possession. He seeks to attain being. He causes certain rare treasures to appear in the world, but he also depopulates it. Nothing exists outside of his stubborn project, therefore nothing can induce him to modify his choices. So there's Beauvoir speaking to the point that I just articulated about the reduction down to an obsession with the sole object of their passion that they have produced as a result of their choice. Well, that's why the passionate man inspires a kind of admiration, but also a kind of horror. You admire the pride of a subjectivity which chooses its end without bending itself to any foreign law, and so you admire their principles in a way, their commitment to it, but it's also because it's obsession and it appears as a kind of, it's monomaniacal in a way. It's also sort of horrifying, like, it's a little much, perhaps pump the brakes a little bit on that. Because again, it's impossible to possess. You cannot possess in the way the passionate one wants to possess, because there's not that self-coincidence with being, again, going back to the existing as a lack kind of thing. So that has taken us through the transition from the serious to nihilism, and then the recognition of nihilism in the adventurer and throwing themselves into that external object. That's the adventurer. The passionate one is the inverse of that. They're not obsessed with some content external to them, but rather with the own internal source of their passion that sets up for them from within the object that they become obsessed with. So I will stop this video here. We will pick up in the next video with a few closing remarks on the relationship between passion and adventure, and then we will move on into sort of the creative aspects. It's significant that she's talked about art at several junctures throughout this section, because she's approaching a discussion of the artist and the writer, which obviously Beauvoir holds in very high esteem, and we'll see in the artist and the writer our first real positive glimpses of authenticity. The writer and the artist can still fall short in important ways that Beauvoir is going to point out, but their creative acts give us, within this text, a glimpse of authenticity, which will become extremely important within existential ethics. So that's where we'll pick up in the next video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.